Have a seat, Mr. Kempkes, and we welcome you this morning, and you may begin your opening remarks.
Good morning. Thank you very much for offering me the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Bruce Kempkes. I'm an Assistant Attorney General who works for the Iowa Department of Justice. I'm not a litigator. I'm not a district court judge. I'm not a Court of Appeals judge. I'm an appellate practitioner. I've been involved in Iowa's appellate process now for 30 years. I've also been here before, but I think repetition can be good. As my wife likes to remind me from time to time, I didn't exactly sweep her off her feet the first time we met, or the second, or the third. But I hope I can grow on you as I seem to have grown upon her. We're at a watershed moment in Iowa's history, not just in its judicial history, but in the state, entire state. Whether it's real or perceived, our Supreme Court has an image problem. And so this is a rare opportunity to begin a healing process for what's happened in the past, as well as an opportunity to make the court stronger in the future, to regain the trust and confidence, not just in the public, but for the entire judicial branch and the practicing bar with regard to the way the court delivers its services to Iowans. This is going to require some change, and institutions are normally resistant to change, but is being demanded, and the court must always remember that it is acting as a service to Iowans, and therefore it should be responsive to the demands of Iowans. At this point in history, given all that's occurred, I think it's incumbent upon an applicant to you to come forward with more than just generalities, more than just saying, I have a superior academic background, I have a great wealth of knowledge about the law, given my experience. I am dedicated to public service, and I am fair and willing and able and dedicated to hard work. I think at this point in time you must take one more step, and that step must be to offer some specific proposals about what you as a candidate can do to improve the Iowa Supreme Court. I think that's a good yardstick for distinguishing the top 9 candidates from the other 51. How much thought have they put into improving the Iowa Supreme Court? Can this person be a catalyst, an agent of change for the court? What I'm about to say is based upon my observations of the court for the past 30 years, but they also involve extensive discussions with various judicial branch personnel, the practicing bar, members of this commission, and perhaps most important, current and former judges on the Supreme Court and Court of Appeals. I intend them only as constructive criticism, as a good friend and neighbor might. I feel that I am well known to the court, and I feel comfortable enough that I can put my arms around it and say, listen, friend, I'm about to tell you some things that you don't want to hear, but I'm going to tell them to you in your best interest, and I hope you take them in that spirit. I'm not sure if all the proposals I have are meritorious, but I think at a minimum they merit discussion among the newly constituted court members. And before I start speaking about them, I would like to recognize all the hard work and effort the Supreme Court has done during this past decade when judicial branch funding has been at an all-time low. The first proposal I have is that the court issue more opinions. If you look at a graph of the output of opinions produced by the court in the past several decades, you'll see a gradual but significant decline from as many as 400 and some opinions in the 1990s to about 120 last year. By some estimates, there will be 100 opinions this next year. I think it might be time for the court to return to its old model, whereby each justice on the court authored 3 opinions per month and a handful of very short per curiam opinions. Returning to this old model, I believe, would lead to two very important benefits. The first is it is going to lead to more published opinions, about 250 a year. It's going to lead to as many 420 per curiam opinions. And that will lead to the second benefit, and that is it will make a significant dent in the current current caseload of our Court of Appeals, which last year decided over 1,100 cases. The second proposal I would bring to the court is that they write shorter opinions. This is only a courtesy to the parties in the case as well as the practicing bar and lower court judges. In the past, most opinions rarely went beyond 30 pages. Today, however, it is not uncommon to see 50, 60, even more typewritten pages devoted to an opinion. And those opinions are laden with footnotes, up to maybe 2 dozen in a single case. I think it's quite possible to fully and fairly decide the issues in a case in 30 pages or less. It is harder to write such an opinion, but I think it can be done. It's been done in the past, and I think the court should recognize that very often less is often more, and that dictum can be counterproductive. The third proposal that I bring is that the court shorten its turnaround time for cases on appeal. Right now, cases are, on average, whether they're criminal or civil, take about 8 to 9 months before they're being disposed of. Of course, that's an average. Some cases will take longer. There are cases that will go up to 2 years in length before they get an appeal handed down by the Supreme Court. I don't know how many people are familiar with the workings of the Supreme Court, but there's currently in practice something called holding over for further study, and that allows a member of the Supreme Court to hold up the issuance of opinion for the process of examining it further. I think they should eliminate that. I think they should return to their prior practice that at conference day, if there's an opinion waiting to be issued, to take an up and down vote at that particular time, whether to join the majority or author a concurrence or a dissent. The fourth proposal I bring involves disciplinary cases and how the court handles them. Of the 120 odd opinions that were handed down last year by our Supreme Court, 17 of them dealt with professional discipline. Those take time to write. They're highly fact specific, and they usually involve a long recitation of sanctions involved in analogous cases. We already have in place in Iowa a system that involves detailed fact-finding and recommended sanctions involving the Commission, and I would like to see the court adopt those findings and sanctions in a short per curiam opinion in 98% of the cases. I offer these proposals because people are expecting more from the court. I know that the court probably does not want to hear that, that it needs to produce more volume. I think my work as an assistant attorney general would come in handy in this regard. I engage in appellate work. I'm used to a high volume, high pressure setting. Our office, like the judicial branch, has suffered drastic cuts since 2002, and we've had to do more with less. But most important, these proposals will benefit the court itself. They will benefit the Court of Appeals and the lower court judges and the bar, and most important, the people of Iowa. Before I turn it over to questions, I would like to mention a single qualification that I have, one I think that makes me stand out from the rest of the other candidates, and that is the number 800. 800 is the number of appearances that I've made in criminal and civil cases in Iowa while practicing law. I think that's a significant number. To put it in perspective, I think if you took the appearances of all other candidates coming before this commission, all 59 of them, and added them together, I don't think they would approach 800. And I think at this particular point in time, experience should count for something in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Kempkes. Do we have any questions from the website? Ms. Skogerson.
Thank you so much for your application, Mr. Kempkes. It's very nice to see you today. I have actually 2 questions, and they're somewhat unrelated. One is, what I was looking in your application at your pro bono activities, and I would like you to tell us about what you've done within the Department of Justice personally in response to budget cuts that reduce the number of attorneys in your office. So a little discussion, I guess, on how you've helped deal with budget cuts. And then the second one is something that I don't think in the past has always been as evident with you in some of these formal interviews is your connection to people, which you certainly have, is my understanding, definitely. So I guess I was kind of wondering how your extensive travel in the U.S. and internationally and your other experiences might be of assistance to you in connecting with the people when serving as a justice of the Iowa Supreme Court.
Sure. Starting with pro bono part of the question, I engaged in volunteerism at a very early age through Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. I went to Yonkers Rehabilitation with my parents to visit with injured people and sick people. So I have a pretty good track record that runs back several decades. When the budget cuts came to our office, then they have involved losing people to early retirement who were never replaced. There were vacancies that were never filled, and I thought it was necessary for me to step up and offer to do more, so that I have helped our special litigation group. I've helped our criminal appeals group. I've helped our area prosecutions group in various cases, trials as well as appeals. And I just thought that I had the experience to do that, and I thought if nobody else did, who would? With regard to other pro bono work that I do now, I serve on a county conservation board as well as a credit union board. I help out with moot courts and in grading the bar exam. I've helped the ABA, American Bar Association, out with various projects they've had in reviewing laws for other countries. When I can do it, I go over to the OLA clinic on the east side of Des Moines to help low-income people. That's kind of difficult to do because it conflicts with my other scheduled board meetings. But I try and do as much as I can to help out. With regard to my foreign travel, I have been lucky enough to travel abroad for about a total of 10 years, mostly on my own with a backpack, sometimes when I was in college. I think everybody agrees who's undertaken some foreign travel realizes how really it broadens your experience and your understanding of people. Until you get out and you travel, particularly in third world countries, you don't realize how little you know about the human condition and what people are capable of doing. You understand that there's different ways of doing anything, and your preconceived notions and biases are challenged on a daily basis. Those type of experiences make you sensitive to others and empathetic. And that's part of the biggest challenge that an Iowa Supreme Court justice must face, because you have to try and balance the rule of law with justice in an individual case. If it was just a matter of applying the rule of law, that would be very simple to do with a computer. We could feed in all the points of law, all the principles of law that had ever existed, and punch in the facts, and the computer would turn out an answer. But there's an element of compassion. There's a human element to deciding cases and deciding when the rule of law must give way to justice. And I think the empathy that you get from foreign travel, from having your biases, preconceived notions challenged, would only make you a better Supreme Court justice.
Any other questions? Mr. Cook.
Sir, Mr. Kempkes, you and I clerked for the longest serving Supreme Court Justice, Justice Jerry Larson. Share with this group what you learned from him that you think qualifies you for this job.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. I'd like to begin that question by talking about what you learned from judges in general. I have seen judges that act as if the courtroom belonged to them, whether they're on the trial bench or the appellate court bench. And I think that the courtrooms belong to the people and not to the judiciary. You can learn a lot from judges who have bad habits. Fortunately, as you know, Justice Larson is not in that particular group. He is the type of judge I think that everyone aspires to be. He's your quintessential small-town guy, the kind that goes back to Harlan and everybody knows, not as judge, not as your honor, not as justice, but just Jerry. He's got a great sense of right and wrong. He's got a great scholastic background serving in the Iowa Law Review at Iowa. He clerked for a federal court judge. He had a small practice in a small town in Iowa. He was a prosecutor. I interviewed Justice Larson for the Supreme Court's video project that has interviews for all former justices on the court. I'm hoping they don't edit out a lot of that. One of the things that stood out in my mind is the experience that he went through in the 1960s when in Harlan there was a meatpacking plant strike, and thugs were brought in from all over the country by the employer to break that strike. And Justice Larson will tell you that he kind of took it upon himself, maybe outside his bailiwick of duties, to deputize some of the townsfolk to keep down the number of bomb threats and fires and shootings that were going on at that point in time. And some of those threats were made against him and his family. And at that time, he was living on the edge of town. And his wife was insistent that they move into town where they could be safer. And he was resisting that. And when he opened the closet once to get his coat out and a gun fell out, she said, "That's it, we're moving to town." But I asked him, and I'm hoping they don't cut this out of the interview, I asked him, did you ever think about giving up? Did you ever think, because you're the county attorney, just resigning your seat and just avoiding all this? And he said, no, this was my community. And I think that kind of sums him up. He was dedicated to public service, and I think that's the example that he gave me most of all.
Any questions on the other side of the table? Mr. Pace.
Good morning, Mr. Kempkes. Thank you for coming today. You not only clerked for one Supreme Court justice, you clerked for two. And I'd like you to comment on that, but also in the course of your interviews over time with our commission, you have given not only the kind of list you had today of some ideas of how things might be done differently or better, but also have related to us your discussions with a number of Supreme Court justices, and I think Court of Appeals judges too, over several years about different things that could be done. And so I think more than any other candidate, you really have made a study of sort of how things could be done administratively in a different way. And I'd just like you to address that for a minute.
Sure. I did clerk for Justice Louis Lavarado after I traveled around around the world for about 3.5 years. I was fortunate enough to be hired by him to be his first law clerk. I think it's always a true adventure to be someone's first law clerk. Perhaps Mr. Gray will be able to explain that as well, because he will be in here shortly. And I think he may have been the first one for Justice Schultz. I might be wrong on that. But Justice Lavarado he has a compelling story, as you all know. His father was a cobbler here in Des Moines, and got him through Drake Law School by working over at Drake Law School. He started his own law firm. He's the kind of guy that will run through a brick wall for you, and that shows. He also has a great compassion for people. That was one of the biggest lessons I learned from him, that you can't forget that the court exists to serve the people, and he was very compassionate about each individual case, whether plaintiff or defendant was involved. He cared about people, and that's the lesson he left me. With regard to my interviews with various people, whether I'm appointed to the court or not, I want to see it do its best. I want to see it improve. I want to see it become the best court in the United States, and it's fully capable of doing that. I think there's nothing wrong with striving and aiming too high.
One more quick question. Anybody have one? Well, I guess you're off the hot seat, Mr. Kempkes. We really appreciate you coming and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.